In lieu of getting together face-to-face this month, we will be looking at data analysis through a couple of quick videos. Hopefully you've been able to take what you gleaned from the January meeting with the ITRTs and apply it to your practice, whether it was an add-on or looking at IXL or how to use Google Forms for assessment. I hope that you were able to get some practical, useful nuggets from that meeting and have been able to incorporate them into your practice. And also just don't forget that your ITRT is such a valuable resource for you in your building. So our focus is on data analysis, and data is often seen as one of those four-letter words, a dirty word that people in the education world don't like, they shy away from, they shudder when they hear the word. And so what we just want to take a few minutes to think about is, why do we collect data, and are we just collecting it, or are we using it in a purposeful way? And so, of course, we track data to identify gaps in knowledge, to identify strands that students are weak in, and to design remediation strategies to address those concerns. And some of what we're going to talk about today, you often sometimes hear me say backward planning for the SOL. I know not all of you have an SOL, but we all have some sort of cumulative assessment, whether it's a final exam, a competency, the WISE test, an end-of-the-year benchmark, the SGA2, the student growth assessment that you give at the end of the year in a lot of buildings. We all have some sort of assessment, and even with not thinking beyond the assessment, content mastery is always our goal. And so we want to think about, how are we using our student data to figure out what students know and what they don't know, so that we can figure out what we need to reteach and what we need to remediate. So our objective for today is to individually, you will be examining the processes for analyzing formative and summative assessment data. The bigger picture, the goal is so that you can use that formative assessment data to inform future instruction. Again, if you're giving, when we think about it kind of at a daily snapshot in your lesson plan, if you have an exit ticket or an assessment that students are turning in, how are you using that assessment data immediately to form future instruction? How are you tiering groups, and what future activities and tasks are you designing to let kids master that content if they haven't mastered already? And then the measurable piece, we want to use data to justify your daily instruction, create your tiered groups, and design your remediation strategy. So where are you now? Again, I've shown you this graph a couple of times, and it does have that very steep descent, but thankfully we are kind of on the upward turn. Hopefully you are no longer in the disillusionment phase. Hopefully you are feeling rejuvenated, and that you feel that you do have a more positive outlook on the teaching profession. You have a better understanding of the school and the school division, and what are the accepted policies, what are the accepted procedures. During the rejuvenation phase, the research shows that you're more apt to focus on curriculum development, long-term planning. You're focusing on fine-tuning your teaching strategies. Hopefully you're not still kind of in that day-to-day, I know what I'm doing today, but I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow yet. Hopefully you have had time to kind of plan ahead and know what's coming, so that way you can tie what you're doing now to what you're going to be doing in the future in your classroom. Again, think about reaching out to your mentor if you have an assigned mentor, or a colleague, a trusted colleague in your building, for assistance as you seek to grow in these areas. You can, of course, always reach out to me if you're trying to strive to collect data on a student. If you're trying to focus on the cognitive level of questioning that you're using in your classroom, your physical movement in the classroom, the alignment of your instruction with your content standards. Are you teaching and assessing at the same level that the standards dictate? And so that kind of leads us into our topic, which is looking at data and at different assessment strategies, and thinking about using our assessment data to work with identified students, again, for remediation, but also for enrichment, students that need to go beyond the current content because they've already mastered it. So we're going to look at a couple of kind of different strategies. Certainly your building principal may have already communicated a certain template or a certain strategy that he or she want you to use, and of course, obviously, we want to follow what our building administrator has laid out. But in case they haven't and they don't require anything, I wanted to just give you a couple of tools to think about when you're looking at your data, so that you can use the data that you've collected in a meaningful way to plan future instruction. So again, when we think about backward planning, we think about that idea that your daily formative assessment should align with your objective. What do you want students to accomplish? How are they going to accomplish it? And how are they going to know that they've accomplished it? And then once you've collected that data, what do you do with it? How do you embed it into your remediation plan? So we're going to look at a couple of different plans, and these plans will be posted in the Google Classroom so that you can access them if you would like to use them in your planning. So this is one that's typically correlated with what's called the 45-day plan. Many of you have probably heard that term before, and it was designed thinking about this is how you would focus your instruction for the 45 days before your SOL test. But again, it doesn't have to be for an SOL test. It could be for an end-of-the-year benchmark, end-of-the-year final exam, a credentialing assessment, any of those things. And the idea is simply that you would use this template. And again, I've started with week 1 being February 11th through the 15th. They are up to date for the 2019 school year, but you could begin in any part of the template you wanted to. You wouldn't have to start on February 11th. You could adjust the dates. And kind of the first step to success with using this backward plan is on the template, you would document your plan for teaching all of the instructional content. You'd look at your pacing guides, your testing blueprints, SOL frameworks, CTE standards, again, depending on the content you teach, and kind of figure out what is that deadline for all content to be taught. Do you have right up until the end of the year? Do you have until the end of April, middle of April? So you want to know kind of what that deadline is for all new content to be taught. And then using your testing blueprint, your midterm data, and your professional knowledge, your assessment data, you would identify kind of the 6 main topics that you should review in the first 6 weeks of the backward plan. And then you would fill in the template to show when you would reteach those concepts. So again, you would start here with the new content, map that out, and then you would move on to the review strategies. What content are you going to review based on what the data shows you as your students' weaknesses? And then you would use your data analysis to actually list specific student names. So what students are you going to target? What students are you going to pull in small groups to reteach that strand that you noted was a weakness? And again, of course, some of you teach multiple preps, and so you would need to do this for your different content areas or your different preps if you're at the secondary level. And kind of the ballpark we always say if you're thinking about it at the secondary level is kind of plan for a daily 20-minute small group review with targeted students. Again, that time is not hard and fast. You've got to make it work for you. Just saying you would take part of your instructional time and dedicate it to reviewing previous content that students haven't mastered yet. Then, of course, once you've targeted those students and figured out who you're going to specifically target, the last thing is you'll list your strategies and activities that you'll use with those targeted students. You also then want to think about what are you going to do for students that aren't targeted, students that have mastered the content already. You don't want to review with them because they've already showed mastery, so thinking about what can be enrichment activities for them to extend their learning, how to allow them to go deeper or to do a project on a topic. And some things to think about that you can collaborate with your grade level or your department to plan the review and the enrichment. So say if I'm, maybe we're teaching partners and we both teach biology, maybe for the week of February 11th through the 15th, I'm going to design all of the enrichment activities, and you also teach biology, you'll plan all of the remediation activities, and then we would share them, so kind of divide the work. You can also think about grouping students. If you and I both teach biology the same period, or one of us has planning, we can collaborate and divide and split students so that one of us can be working with the students who need remediation and some of us can be working with the students who need enrichment. Don't forget about using collaborative teachers, special ed teachers effectively, paraprofessionals. And those enrichment opportunities are a great opportunity, of course, to embed personalized learning opportunities where students could select from a menu of options of what they want to pursue. They could be using an adaptive computer program or, again, kind of pursuing a project on a topic of their choosing. And then, of course, later in the year, if you give the SGA2 or any additional assessments, you could always continuously update your assessment data and figure out, have the weaknesses changed? Have the student groupings changed? Maybe a student's no longer in the targeted student group and they have moved out. So you want to make sure that you revisit your data and update it accordingly and what is appropriate. The next thing that you can, of course, access is PowerSchool Assessment and Analytics. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because you don't all have access to that program in terms of data. The 4 core content areas can design tests and give tests through PowerSchool Assessment and Analytics. The rest of you can just kind of look at demographic information, previous SOL and benchmark scores, student grades and attendance. And I'm going to post a handout in the Google Classroom that not only explains the template in more detail, kind of step by step, that you can follow to fill out a 45-day plan template if that's appropriate for your students and your needs. And then also there'll be a handout that gives you step-by-step directions of how to use PowerSchool Assessment and Analytics to look at your student data. But there's kind of 3 different tabs that you can use. Of course, when you log into PowerSchool Assessment Analytics, you would go to the Reporting tab, click Assessment Results, choose your subject, and choose the assessment that you want to look at the results for. And the Overview tab is specifically great when you want to look at whole class data, when you want to look at SOL strands for the whole class to review. And so when you first get in, the green bars will show you kind of the students passing. The red bars represent the number of students failing. And then you can see which students are in each category. And so if you actually hover over the bar, it tells you the number of students who struggled with Math 3.1a. And then when you click on the bar, it'll give you actual students so that I know which students need work with 3.1a. And then I can start to design assessments and tasks that will help to correct the cognitive gaps that they have at the time. So that's one screen that is great to use, again, to kind of identify whole class weaknesses. And again, the handout will talk through how to get to these screens and how to change the cut score and that sort of thing so that you can change it to what your cut score is for your SOL test. You can look at additional reports, but I'm not going to go through all of that now since not everyone will be using PowerSchool Assessment Analytics. The next tab that you can look for is the Grade Sheet tab, and that is useful when you're creating small groups for targeted remediation and review. The color-coded report allows teachers to identify which students are struggling with which SOL strands. And so you can, of course, access, again, the specific assessment that you want to see, pull over a grade sheet, and then you can look at each student's percentage by SOL strand. You can click Show, and then you can look at question by question or by SOL strand and see where the weaknesses exist. So again, this is great for small group review to figure out which students struggled with which strands. And then lastly, the SOL and item analysis tab, the third tab, includes information about how the students in the class performed on each question. And so that can be used as a discussion point with the whole class. The bar dividing student names from the main portion of the screen is adjustable so that you can hide student names. We want to make sure that if we're using this in front of the whole class that we keep student information private. So you can just slide the bar to the left, and so that way the student scores can be blocked from view. And then you can display the question on your projector and along with the percentage of students that chose each answer. And so you can see the correct answer is noted in green and it has a percentage. And then you can kind of talk about, okay, the option that most students chose incorrectly, let's talk about why did we make that answer choice? What threw us off? And sometimes it could be it's a bad question, PowerSchool Assessment and Analytics, but a lot of times it helps to identify misconceptions that students have. And so, of course, that's another great tool that you can use. So again, there's a handout in the classroom that will walk you through all of this in more detail. I'm going to go ahead and stop here and then create one more quick video that'll just be a couple minutes to explain the assignment in Google Classroom and also remind you of our next meeting.